recognize that nature is the infrastructure of our communities. And that if we want to meet our obligation as a generation, as a civilization, as a nation, which is to create communities that provide our children with the same opportunities for dignity and enrichment and prosperity and good health as the communities that our parents gave us, we've got to start by protecting our environmental infrastructure, the air we breathe, the water we drink, the wildlife, the fisheries, the public lands. Good environmental policy is identical to good economic policy. If we want to measure our economy, and this is how we ought to be measuring it, based upon how it produces jobs and the dignity of jobs over the generations, over the long term, and how it preserves the value of the assets of our community. And one of the things that I've done over the past 25 years as an environmental advocate is to constantly go around and confront this argument that an investment in our environment is a diminishment of our nation's wealth. It doesn't diminish our wealth. It's an investment in infrastructure, the same as investing in telecommunications and road construction. It's an investment we have to make if we're going to ensure the economic vitality of our generation and of future generations. Now, the biggest challenge that we face nationally in the United States and globally is how we use energy. How do we extract it? How do we deploy it? How do we utilize it? And how do we need the energy, but how do we do that in ways that don't compromise the aspirations of future generations and destroy our own health and destroy the planet and destroy our value system? You know, in England, virtually everybody accepts the science behind global warming, and they understand it's a grim reality that government has to take a strong hand in addressing. But there's still vested interests in other people who say that, you know, we have to move slowly, we have to move incrementally, because if you move precipitously, if you move too fast, that it's going to cause grave dislocations in the marketplace. The oil industry receives $550 billion in subsidies every year, direct subsidies from nations, you know, all over the world. But we give in our country, through direct subsidies, about $50 billion to oil, the oil depletion allowance, and a lot of direct federal payments, but also in indirect subsidies, much, much more. The $100 billion that we spend every year giving military protection to the oil pipelines in the Gulf, which are part of the hidden externalities or subsidies to big oil. The damage to crops in our country, the damage to human health. In our country, recently, the National Academy of Sciences estimated that the human health costs from burning oil are about $156 billion a year in healthcare costs to our country. Every freshwater fish in the United States of America now has dangerous levels of mercury in its flesh. So it's dangerous to eat. Every fish in our country, freshwater fish in our country. We're living in a science fiction nightmare in the United States, where my children and the children of most Americans can now no longer engage in the primal, seminal activity of American youth, which is to go fishing with their father and mother in the local fishing hole and to come home and safely eat the fish. And that's part of the price of coal that they don't tell you about when they say it's 10 cents a kilowatt hour. According to the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, which is another federal agency, 1 out of every 6 American women now has so much mercury in her womb that her children are at risk for a grim inventory of diseases: autism, blindness, mental retardation, heart, liver, and kidney disease. This is part of the price of coal. I got my mercury levels tested recently. I fish a lot, and I eat the fish. And my levels are 10 times what EPA considers safe. I was told by Dr. David Carpenter, who is a national authority on mercury toxicity, that a woman with my levels of mercury in her blood would have children with cognitive impairment, permanent brain damage. And I said to him, "You mean she might have?" And he said, no, the science is very certain. Her children would have some level of permanent neurological injury. Probably, he estimated, a permanent IQ loss in those kids of about 5 to 7 points. Well, according to CDC, there are 640,000 children born in the United States every year who've been exposed to dangerous levels of mercury in their mother's wombs. Well, that's part of the price of coal that they don't tell you about when they say it's 10 cents a kilowatt hour. We are #1 in wind resources in the world. The Great Plains states are the Saudi Arabia of wind. North Dakota is the windiest place on earth at sea level. We have enough wind in North Dakota, Montana, and Texas to provide 100% of the energy needs of our country, even if every American owned an electric car 3 times over. And I can see that we are at parity already with big oil and coal. If you got rid of the subsidies, they couldn't compete with us in the marketplace. If we had a true free market system in our country, which we do not. We have a heavily subsidized system that essentially is socialism for the rich and for the oil industry, and then capitalism for the poor and for everybody else. We don't have an electronic grid in our country that is capable of carrying these new currents of energy. And this is the biggest obstacle. Our current grid system was underbuilt, it is already overloaded, and it's misaligned. It doesn't reach the big solar providers in the desert Southwest. It doesn't reach the big wind areas in the Midwestern, the Great Plains states of our country. And it's incapable of doing long-haul transmission of electrons. It's an AC system, so that, around the border, every farmer virtually in North Dakota wants to put wind turbines on their farms because it will generate huge amounts of income for them on a very small footprint. It will allow them to hold on to their family farms, which is very important in a democracy. That's a very important investment to make in a democracy. We need to connect every American home to a national grid that is a smart grid, that can intelligently store and deploy solar energy at night, wind energy during the doldrums, and move energy resources around to reduce, to eliminate peak demand, or eliminate spikes that come from when you have peak demand, that can reach into people's houses and turn off, when you hit peak, turn off the hot water boilers in 1 million homes, turn off the electric toothbrush rechargers, stuff that you don't care about, turn off your cell phone rechargers or your swimming pool recirculator. All of these phantom charges in our home that help contribute to peak demand, which is the biggest cost and the biggest problem to energy in our country. We need to create a national marketplace for energy that is truly a free market. My house is a power plant. I'm powered not only by geothermal, but I have 2 solar systems, and my home produces much more energy than we use. I ought to be able to sell that energy back onto the grid and get market rates for it. Today, there's no state that you can do that. In my state, I can sell it back, and they'll run my meter backwards till it stops, but they won't give me market rates for my energy. So, what we need to do is to create a national marketplace for energy in our country that connects every American to a national grid system, and that does what a marketplace, that's a rational marketplace, that rationalizes the incentive systems so they're consistent with the public interest, and makes a marketplace that does what a market is supposed to do, which is to reward good behavior, which is efficiency, and to punish bad behavior, which is inefficiency and waste. Right now, we have a marketplace that was designed by the incumbents with rules that favor the dirtiest, filthiest, most poisonous, most addictive, most destructive fuels from hell, rather than the cheap, clean, green, abundant, and wholesome fuels from heaven. And we need to change that dynamic around and rationalize our marketplace so that every American can become an energy entrepreneur and every home can become a power plant.